Mike. Next exercise goes the second last exercise. We're learning variance and standard deviation. It's part of the new course that we've got to learn this. So variance scales, we've actually done this last year in year 11. It's basically how far off the scores are from the mean. All right? Whereas standard deviation is square root of that. We'll get into that later. So let's say we have these set of scores. So we basically want to know what the mean is, obviously, because that's what variance is about. How far off are each of these scores from the mean? So we know how to calculate the mean. I won't calculate that. So step number 1 is to calculate the mean, and that's 5. Okay? Now the second step is we've got to calculate how far off each of these scores are from the mean. So the formula to do that is actually the score take away the mean, not the mean take away the score. Okay? So the score in this case is 4. So 4 take away 5 is -1. 7 take away 5 is 2. 3 take away 5 is -2, and so on. All right? So I'm just going to list them out. That's 0. 1 take away 5 is -4, -2, 0, and 4. Once you've calculated how far off each of the scores are from their mean, the third step is to actually now square it, because there are negative numbers and I don't want any negative numbers. So once you square each number, so this becomes 1, that becomes 4, 4, 16, 1, 0, 16, 4, 0, and 16. Once you square it, find the total of all those scores that you've just figured out. So if you add all of these numbers, you're going to get 62. So the calculation of the variance finally is to now get that number and divide by how many scores there are. In this case, there are 10 scores. Let me just double check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay? So that's 6.2. So what this number represents is 6.2 is relatively the number of how far each of those scores are from the mean summed up. Does that make sense? Does the calculation make sense? Yep. Now, to calculate the standard deviation, what you're doing is basically you're square rooting that, and which is 2.49. Now, the reason why you're square rooting it is because we squared each of the differences, didn't we? So we want to go backwards. So that's the reason why you square root it to find the standard deviation. Okay? Now, one thing you've got to keep in mind, so standard deviation is just basically variance by square root of the variance. And there are two versions of standard deviation. One is sample, one is population. So when it's sample, you're just finding the standard deviation of it's just a certain group of scores or data you get. Whereas population is you're getting the standard deviation from the rest of from every single person or data valuable. Okay? So when you find the standard deviation without using a calculator like I did here, this actually represents the population standard deviation. All right? Whereas if you find the standard deviation using a calculator, you want to find the sample. Okay? Use the sample, not the population, and then we want to square it to find the variance. All right, so let's now get to the calculator steps. So this is how you find it without a calculator. To use a calculator, girls, here's the example there, the table. We're going to find the standard deviation from there. So once again, the first thing you want to do is press shift mode, go down and press 3, and you want the frequency on. That's the first thing you want to do. Okay? Second thing you want to do now is press mode 2 and 1 and enter the scores as usual. So 2 equals 2 equals 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then go across up 2, 4, 3, 4, 1, 2, 4. Once you've done that, get out. It's the same steps as what you've been doing to calculate the mean and other stuff. Shift 1, 4. Now see how you've got 3? That's the population standard deviation. 4 is the sample standard deviation. For this exercise and any questions that you're given where you need to use a calculator, calculate the sample. Okay? Because the frequency table given to you girls, it's usually a representation of the sample group of data you're gathering, not the whole census or the whole population. Does that make sense? So that's your standard deviation. And as we know, to get the variance, we're going backwards. That means you have to square root that number to find the variance. So all you need to do is square root answer, and that will get you the variance, 1.2. Okay? So my point is, when you find the variance and standard deviation without a calculator, what you're finding is the population, whereas if you're using a calculator, you're finding the sample. Does that make sense? Okay, you do need to know how to do both methods, obviously, because sometimes you just never know with these exams. They can sometimes ask you to work backwards. Like, yes, finding the standard deviation in sample is easy, you can calculate, but what if they sometimes say, you've got a certain number and a score excluded and you don't know that score? What is that score if the variance is this, and etc. Okay, so you've got to work backwards, so you've got to know these steps.
Here's random questions that we have to do, Ramshar.